Hello, I'm Dawn Westmoreland, hailing from Asheville, North Carolina, the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains, hailing from WPVM FM LP 103.7, the voice of Asheville. And if you follow me, I'm all about the workplace. I've been in HR, goodness, over 32 years. And it's very important to me and to other people to have safe and respectful work environments. Now, today we're going to talk about psychological safety because there's different angles that people come from, whether there's an HR person talking about it, a psychologist talking about it, but it's been trending for a long time. And there are a lot of people that are really nervous. You know, when you see Amazon letting people off, you see Google letting people off. Oh my goodness, it gets really scary. I'm excited to say that I have Ryan McShane. He is an HR expert, HR evolution. I say evolution, revolution, I got it all together. And I've interviewed him many times because he is a wealth of information. Ryan, good morning. How are you? Good afternoon if you're listening in the afternoon.
Good morning, Dawn. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It is always so much fun to have a conversation with you. So I'm really excited about this, and especially because we're talking about something that's so important that affects all of us. And I think this is a great opportunity for your listeners to have a better and deeper understanding of this concept of psychological safety. And I think you'll know what I mean when we go on with our conversation about the two varied perspectives around psychological safety.
Yeah, people are nervous. Should they have any reason to be nervous? And I'm talking about employees.
Well, and as you mentioned in the intro, I think that there's a greater concern out in the cultural zeitgeist, if you will, when you see large organizations that are staples in our industry, in our economy, such as Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Facebook and things of that nature. These are large organizations that are laying off people by the thousands.
Mhm.
And so, you see what you may view as a successful company starting to lay off people by the thousands. You start to wonder, okay, when is the next shoe going to drop? When's it going to start to affect me in my walk of life, whether I work for those organizations or not? There seems to be a ripple effect in the economy when these things take place. And the largest organizations are kind of a weather vane that shows us which way the weather's blowing. And so I think that it's pretty natural for executives to start to be concerned about their own viability and think about how they can continue to monitor their bottom line. And oftentimes that bottom line is most affected by salaries, because that's typically the biggest line item in most organizational budgets. So that's something that I think is prevalent for most of us. And whether we consciously recognize it or not, that is an anxiety and a fear that is unconsciously impacting millions and millions of people today.
Well, we never know because, there's so many states that are at will, which, to the person who's not HR familiar with it, they can be laid off for almost anything from a company except for the exception of discrimination.
Yeah.
Is there anything that employees should be concerned about, or, even employers, because sometimes they never know that they're going to have to let people off? I mean, that's a big loaded question.
Yeah, you're so right. And I think from that standpoint, we've got to recognize that there's a concept called psychological contract as well. We're talking about psychology here, psychological safety. Well, let's bring in another term, the psychological contract. And the psychological contract, it was an unspoken contract that really existed between employer and employee for many decades. And this contract started to dissipate in the late 70s and 80s. And it started to implode when we saw evidence of, hey, mom and dad are getting downsized, right sized, and all kinds of sized right now. And I don't understand it, because they continue to show up and do a good job. Why are they getting laid off? And that's the psychological contract that used to exist between employer and employee, that if you continue to show up and do a good job and you're on time and all those kind of things, you'll continue to have a good job. So this breakdown of that psychological contract started to exist when these major downsizings took place. Hey, we continue to uphold our end of the bargain. We showed up, we did a good job, we were on time, and here we are still being laid off. So consequently, there's a lack of trust. There's a lack of loyalty. You know, you hear that all the time from the older generations. Oh, these younger generations, they don't have any loyalty and this, that, and the other. You know, they're loyal. They're loyal to their career and they're loyal to their teammates, but they're not necessarily loyal to their organizations. And that has a wholly different context to it. And that's something that I think we should all be very well aware of.
And I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Ryan, about them being loyal to their careers. It seems like it's a different generation that, you know, they're going to stand up and speak up about things that maybe, you know, your generation and my generation, you know, would never do.
Yeah, so true. So true. So let's go ahead and jump into this definition of what is psychological safety.
Perfect.
Um, there's been myriad perspectives on this, and I'm going to hit on the two major polar perspectives on this concept. But first, I want to define it. So I looked up the definition real quick before we jumped on here, and psychological safety is that belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And at work, it's a shared expectation held by members of a team that teammates won't be embarrassed, rejected, or punished for sharing these ideas or taking risks or even soliciting feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's important as our basis to have this conversation around psychological safety, to understand the definition behind it. But there's two major paradigms when we think about psychological safety. I think most people from an HR, IO psychology standpoint recognize and operate from that definition. However, there's kind of another perspective on this that says, you know, these kids are just they're fragile, they're weak, they're a bunch of snowflakes, and they need coddled all the time. And so when you bring up this concept of psychological safety, they kind of wave you off and say, all right, go away, snowflake. I think it's important to recognize that that's very dismissive of something that we all need. Even those people who are dismissing that idea, I think are unfortunately not recalling the times in which they were coming up in their career and some of the challenges and abuses that they may have experienced and how life would have been so much better at work had they not experienced some of those things. I'll give you an example of that. You know, they say there's a famous saying out there that nurses eat their young. I don't know if you've ever heard that one before, Dawn.
Often I've had clients that were nurses.
Okay. Okay. So you know what I mean when I say that,
Mhm.
that when they're brought up in the ranks of nursing, they're literally hazed and treated really tough. And so, you know, I always wonder, why is this continuing to perpetuate? Well, and so the same people that hated it when they were coming up through the ranks seem to say, well, this is just par for the course. This is what you do. And you turn around and you haze those people that, you know, came behind you, even though you hated it. And this obviously creates an environment of fear and intimidation. And so I think it's important to understand, what does fear and intimidation create? Well, I think for most people, it creates a reactive response. And so in that reactive response, you're typically self-protective. And so let's look at this from a Maslow's hierarchy standpoint. You know, the very baseline of that triangle is survival. And you move up and you've got self-protection. And that self-protection is, you know, you can visualize a turtle. A turtle pulls back in its shell once it wants to protect itself. And that's, you know, figuratively what we're doing in our organizational environments, where you fear, you know, retaliation or reaction or cancel culture. You know, we're also concerned about those kinds of concepts that we're not going to speak up. We're not going to stick out our head for fear it'll be chopped off. And in so doing, this creates a reticence to change for any person individually, but collectively across the organization. If everyone is experiencing this as an individual, the collective impact of that is you have teams that aren't willing to speak up and stand out and voice their concern. we've been told so often, throughout our careers, think outside the box. And then as soon as we do, it's like, no, no, not like that. No, no, don't do that. I got a quick story for you related to that. It was very early on in my career, and I was hired as a HR generalist, reporting to the vice president of human resources, and a few other generalists were hired around the same time as I was. And he assembled everybody and said, "Hey, we're going to meet regularly. And so I want you to know that this meeting is yours, and I want you to tell me what you guys want to talk about and all this kind of stuff." And so, I spoke up. I think I was the first one to speak up. And I said, well, it occurs to me that every one of us comes from a different walk of life, and we have different experiences and different strengths. What if we took 5 minutes of this meeting? You said it was our meeting, so I'm just asserting this idea. What if we took 5 minutes out of this meeting for us to cover a particular topic under the HR umbrella in which we might have a particular expertise, whether it be organizational development or, family leave or, payroll or benefits or something along those lines. If you have expertise in that area, if you shared it and then I shared my expertise, hey, we would all learn from one another, and we would, everyone would lift their skills. I thought this was a pretty good idea, Dawn. And the response that I got, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I could not believe it. The vice president of human resources looks at me and says, "Well, Ryan, while we do support ongoing continuous learning, we encourage you to do those things outside of these walls."
Oh boy.
Hey, yeah, like I said, you could have knocked me over with a feather at that point. And so everybody kind of looked around the room, and there was a little bit of eye rolling, a little bit of shock. And so what do you think happened as a result of that, Dawn?
They shut up. I mean, I
No
know
one said
how it
another
is.
word.
That guy, the manager, did not walk the talk.
Definitely
It's
did
like
not.
putting out a mission statement or vision statement, but not following through.
That's
Yeah.
exactly it.
So Ryan, you have a ton of experience in leadership, and we're always learning from you because you come in with different angles, on that. What are some of the things that leaders, and I say leaders, not managers, and companies can do to make their employees feel psychologically safer?
I'm glad you asked the question, because what really predominates the culture in any organization is the leadership. They're the ones that define, the culture, what we're permitted to do, what we're not permitted to do, and it's modeled whether they recognize that they're modeling these behaviors or not. And so, if you have an authoritarian, dictatorial leader, that's what you're going to experience from everyone underneath of that particular leader. If you have a servant leader who is there to equip all of his or her followers with the resources that they need to be successful, and they approach it from a coaching model, you have a wholly different kind of culture and environment. So I think it really comes down to what can we do about this? What kind of remedies might be in place for this? Is, you just mentioned it, core values. Having core values related to a mission and a vision, and having those things discussed regularly. It's not just a sign on the wall that we pay homage to when people come to visit the office. This is a part of our DNA. This is
Yeah.
how we operate. It's reflected in our policies and procedures. It's reflected in our relationships. It's reflected in how people outside of the organization view us. And so having, like I said, regular and recurring conversations around culture. In addition to that, being open to having two-way, transparent conversation. And I think that it's important to break this down. Most communication in organizations comes from top down. And so, and that's endemic of a command and control structure. When I say jump, your only response is how high? Well, guess what? That's not two-way communication. So I think we need to make sure that we proliferate the concepts of two-way communication and hold space for our frontline employees to share what is it that they have concerns over. And if they're not able to share their concerns, and there's all different types of concerns that keep us stuck and in the self-protection mode. And those are informational concerns. Do we have enough information to be able to make decisions? Those are role concerns. Do I understand what's expected of me and my role and my goals? And is that clearly defined across the team, or are we going to step on each other's toes because we don't have roles clearly defined? Next are directional concerns. Which way are we going? And do we believe in that approach of which way we're supposed to go? What is the target and how we're going to ultimately get there? And then interpersonal concerns. Am I supported in being fully who I am in the organizational environment? Does someone take the effort to truly know me? And that's an underlying concept that I think you'll see in most personal growth and professional growth literature that's out there these days, is the integral importance of getting to know your employees on a personal level. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to do that and say, no, we're going to be professional here and we're going to hold you at arm's length, so to speak. And, as a result of that, we don't get to know each other. We don't understand, what are your triggers? What are the things that turn you on? What are the things that turn you off? What are the things that, really motivate you? What are the things that demotivate you? And without having that personal understanding of one another, we constantly miss each other in terms of understanding. And that's where that communication comes in and is so integral to having a safe work environment. I just happened to see a clip that was so relevant to our conversation this morning. Let me see if I can find it real quick. If we replaced cancel culture with critical thinking, we'd have empathetic conversations instead of emotional reactions. And by talking, we learn to separate honest mistakes from actual hate. And so this quote says so much. And I think it really talks to the fact that we're not having those kind of conversations. And that's where the psychological safety comes up, is we need to make sure that it's really understood clearly by everyone that you can voice your concerns in a safe manner and not be judged for it. And as a result of that, that's where our creativity comes in. One of the, I support people in career transition. And I talk to a lot of executives, in terms of what they're looking for in future talent. And a consistent theme related to that is critical thinking and problem solving and the ability to relate to other people of diverse backgrounds. Well, none of those things can exist unless you're operating from a different paradigm than what is self-protection. When you're in that self-protection mode, you are basically psychologically in your shell, and anything that comes by that shell external to you is viewed as a potential threat. And so if you view everything outside of you as a threat, you're not open to relating to it. You're not open to being transparent. You're not open to getting to know that other person or entity or whatever it may be. So you can start to see the relationship of this and how it either creates a downward spiral or an upward spiral within the organization.
Now, we hope and we absolutely wish that leaders would employ ways to and actions to create that safety, that psychological safety. But let's turn it over to the employees. Let's say it's a pretty good sized company. A lot of people do not feel psychologically safe. Is there a way that they can come to the leadership? Is there a proper way to let them know, hey, we don't feel safe. We feel like we don't have a voice. Any recommendations?
Typically, that kind of communication is funneled through the Office of Human Resources. And then it comes down to whether or not Human Resources understands their pivotal role as a bridge between the employees and the management of the organization. All too often, I've been asked throughout my career, as an HR professional, are you a management advocate or an employee advocate? And my answer to that question is yes. It's not one or the other. It never has been one or the other. Everybody concerned, I'm an advocate of. However, we have to not dismiss the real factor that a lot of HR folks say, hey, management's the ones that pay my salary. I better have a greater allegiance to them than the employees. And so it's a matter of whether or not human resources is going to bubble up your concerns to management and take that concern to them legitimately and say, hey, these are some things that are causing a performance detriment or an engagement detriment or a turnover detriment. And those are the things that we constantly hear, not just the mass layoffs, but there's the issue of people quiet quitting, where they're just doing the basics of their job.
Right.
And so those are, if you want a highly productive workforce who is performing at their optimal level, then these conditions must exist in order for that performance to take place. So I think that in terms of remedies, we mentioned before, we have to have core values. We have to have them related to the mission and vision. We have to discuss them regularly and reinforce them. We have to have that transparent communication that's two-way. We have to have servant leadership, and we also have to have collaborative and supportive environments for one another. And that really describes the culture. But those are all external things. And so we hope that those kind of things in place. But what do we have control over? Only us internally. So what are some internal things that you can do? Well, you want to have respect for yourself and others. And so that's something that you can control is I'm going to respect myself, and that includes not being abused and speaking up when I am abused. I want to have respect for other people. And so when I see others abused, I might speak up, or I might try to come over and help them in some way, shape, or form. I think we also, related to that, need a little bit of self-love, in addition to self-respect. And we also need personal accountability for our decisions and recognize that you are going to be accountable. And I think that's where we have a lot of breakdown in organizations, is a lack of accountability. We also need a level of forgiveness for self and others. If you can forgive yourself for some of the mistakes that you make, you can also forgive others for some of the mistakes that they make, and side on, come down on the side of recognizing that, most people want to do a good job. It's just a matter of whether or not they're given the resources to be successful. And so recognizing that, hey, 99% of the people want to do a good job. Let's make sure that we keep that in mind, that these are actual honest mistakes, that there wasn't a malice behind those kind of mistakes. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. So there's that personal accountability, then forgiveness of self and others. And then I think that the younger generation is really aligned to seeking meaning and purpose. And so if we're not having greater conversations about not just the tactical components of your job, but having a wherewithal to understand the larger strategy and the bigger meaning, vision, and purpose behind what we do, I think that's in alignment with the most self-aware generation that's coming into the workforce. The millennials and the Gen Zs, they have access to more information than any other generation out there. And so they're much more socially conscious and socially aware. So I think what we have to do is make sure that our organization and what we're doing ties to much larger meaning and purpose. And psychologically speaking, most of us like to be aligned to something that's bigger than us. We want to make sure that we're having an impact at the end of the day. And so if you feel like you can have that impact in your work environment and your culture, then people are going to not be set back so easily as a result of the first hiccup or the first challenge, that they recognize that those challenges are par for the course. And when they understand that there's meaning and purpose behind what they're doing, they're going to overcome those challenges because they see the bigger picture.
Ryan, you said something that I was so glad you brought up about HR's role. Are they for the employees basically, or are they for the employers?
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of things that comes around in circles. I'm sure you've seen it, where you see, is HR your friend? So I'm glad you brought that up about the advocacy of, both the employees and the employers. Really glad about that. Now, are there any books or resources that somebody could learn from more about psychological safety that you're aware of?
That's a great question.
And you may be the resource too.
Well, I'm thinking about you, Dawn, because I think so much of your work really has an underpinning of psychological safety around it. The outstanding work you've done about bullying and abuse and harassment in the workplace, I think really speaks to this concept. And I would refer people to your books and your information and literature because I think you've done an outstanding job of really framing this well and giving people the resources and support that they need if they're encountering it. So I just want to applaud you and everything that you've done in that regard. Um,
Okay, I'm turning purple. Thank you for that. I didn't expect that. Right. You're such a good person. You're so kind.
it's
But
so
let's
true.
let's turn it back to you because I know that you're a adjunct professor and you're awesome at training, and I know you're awesome at consulting, leading. What kind of services are you offering out there in HR so our listeners can find out more about you and how to get in touch with you?
Thank you for asking. Well, my website is www.hrevolutionllc.com. And there you'll find my three areas of service that I provide. Number one is HR consulting. So I consult with small to medium-sized businesses on their people strategies and implementing best practices across the employment life cycle that will benefit their operations, productivity, performance, and ultimately their bottom line. And then I also support people in career transition. So I'm typically working to mid to senior level executive in their career and
Okay.
supporting them with their professional branding. And then finally, I support people and organizations from a leadership development standpoint. So you mentioned I do adjunct faculty work, and primarily that's HR and leadership development. But I'm also called into organizations oftentimes to say, hey, we need some professional development. We've got some new managers in here and new supervisors. And I'm always delighted when they call me in for those kind of opportunities because I think we also have an epidemic in our country of promoting people into these leadership roles and then not giving them training to be successful. And so we're almost setting people up for failure when we do that. So I'm delighted to see the proactive organizations that recognize and understand that, hey, if you're promoting someone into a leadership role, understand that the competencies and skills associated with that role are vastly different from the individual contributor role. And so what got you here won't necessarily get you there to the next step. And we have to recognize the separation of those two things and prepare people to be successful in those roles of stewardship over other people. And by and large, what happens is we do what we see, right, Dawn? And so if we have patterns of authoritarianism and dictatorship in our organizations, guess what? When we come to those leadership roles, we're probably going to operate in a very similar manner because that's part of the course. That's the culture around here. Well, that's not always in alignment with what's going to get the best out of your employees. And so that's what really excites me about working with people from a leadership development standpoint is giving them the tools and the skills to be able to support self-actualization of the employee. How can I bring out the best in every employee that reports to me? And if that's your intention, that's going to have a positive impact on the performance, on the culture, on your bottom line. So that single intention can guide all of your doing. But if your intention is, I just want to make the numbers look good, then guess what? We're measuring the wrong things. And as a result of the positioning of that intention, there's a number of behaviors that could make the numbers look good, but they're not always going to be in the best interest of the people that produce those numbers. So let's put our focus where it needs to be and taking care of the people that take care of us.
Absolutely. Now, if somebody's out in the West Coast, because you're on the East Coast like I am,
Mhm.
and they want to hire you, are you doing any virtual? Are you doing in person
Yeah.
training?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. As of 2020, so much of my work has gone virtual as a result of the major shutdowns and so forth. And that's really opened up some opportunities for me. And as a result of that, I've been working with people not just across the United States, but all over the world. And I've really, that's just been such a blessing and an honor to be able to support and serve people. As a result of technological advances, we are now enabled to do that. And that's exposed me to white collar organizations, blue collar organizations, gray collar organizations, and everything in between. And that's been supported by virtual training, virtual consulting, and then working with people in a virtual way to support them over their career as well.
Okay. So I have a sentence I want you to finish, please. I
Okay.
am a HR disruptor because
I am an HR disruptor because we can do so much better. We can do so much better.